Hello, my name is Brent Sweater, and I'm going to be giving you a presentation, components of teacher evaluation, really focusing on the effectiveness of students' teachers' surveys. In my presentation, I'm going to be talking about data from the Measurements of Effective Teaching Project, or MET. Many of the changes that we are seeing in teacher evaluations are stemming from research done by the MET project. And I think that understanding its findings could really help New York City teachers understand this new system and what they're trying to get at. The project was funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. They looked at data from nearly 3,000 teachers. It's important to note that these teachers were volunteers. So their average abilities and effort to get and use feedback may be better than you would see in actual teaching population. The population was pulled from 6 school districts. The school districts tended to be large urban school districts with high levels of diversity, and New York City Department of Education did participate in this. Here we're going to look at the demographics of the entire MET project and the demographics from the paper that I'm going to be just talking about. Under the first blue header here, we can see that's the teacher demographics, and below that is the student demographics. Now, when looking at the teacher demographics, we can see two things that really pop out. One, teachers are disproportionately female. Looking about 8 out of every 10 teachers is female, and that we have the majority of them are white. Upwards of 60% of the teachers are white. This contrasts with the student population, where we're seeing an even distribution of males and females, and we're also seeing, if you take African Americans and Latinos, bring them together, they're actually about 60% of the population, a little bit more than 60% of the population. The Latino population is very underrepresented as teachers. You're looking at 36% of the students being Latino, but less than 7% of the teachers being Latino. It's possible that this large disparity is due to at least part, from the changing demographics of our nation, where young people do tend to be more likely to be Latino than older people, but I'm not sold that that's the only reason we're seeing this. Data presented in the presentation, and really the paper that I'm going to be looking at today, was taken from 4th to 8th grade math and English language art classes. Over 2,500 classrooms were used in this study. Each student in which one of these classrooms received an end-of-the-year student evaluation, and in addition to that, they received 2 standardized tests, one being the state exam for that class subject, and the other being an additional standardized assessment in that subject that was really designed to look at more higher-order thought processes. The student surveys were composed of questions designed to get at one of 7 factors, with all of them having convenient C names: care, control, clarify, challenge, captivate, confer, and consolidate. We're going to take a closer look at the factors and the questions that make up those factors. In the blue heading, you will be able to see the factor's name, and then below that, the questions that the students saw on the teacher evaluations. I just want to point out that they wouldn't all be in a row like this. All these questions would be mixed up. They're all based on a 7-point Likert scale, and you'll notice that some of these questions are written in the positive, some of them are written in the negative. You do that so you can go ahead and see if the participants are actually reading the test or reading the survey, instead of just going ahead and filling in 5 for each one, or 7 for each one, or 1 for each one. Okay, so the first factor that we're going to be looking at is care. This factor is designed to assess the teacher's interpersonal skills, or basically, did the students think the teachers liked and cared about them? The next factor is control. Did the teacher have command over the classroom? Does the class behave, and do they do what the teacher asks them to do? The author suggests that this is one of the most important predicting factors of the student outcome, and we'll actually see that in the data later. Third factor is clarify. Does the teacher explain concepts? I thought this factor would be a stronger predictor than it turned out to be, but I think that may be due to the subjects being tested, math and English. I think that this may be a better predictor in science classes, where more of the ability to answer questions, especially in-depth questions, has to do with, do you understand the concepts? And that, I feel, a lot comes from, can the teacher explain that in a variety of ways to reach more students? Next factor is challenge. Is the class working and being pushed forward in their learning? Is the teacher challenging them? We're going to find out later that the researchers think that this one is also a strong predictor, and they're really going to be grouping together control and challenge to form kind of a better predictor factor. Then there's captivate. Is the teacher entertaining and enthralling? Next is confer. Do students speak in class? Do they feel that their thoughts are valued? I would think this factor most closely represents a lot of what we're seeing right now pushed out from administrations. What we're trying to move more to is student-centered learning, where students spend more time sharing their ideas and understanding the topic through discussion. Finally, there's the factor of consolidate. This is, does the teacher summarize the lesson and learning, and does the teacher give effective feedback? The authors use a measure called value added to assess a teacher effectiveness. The idea is to see if student evaluations are good predictors of value added, this factor that they're making up, looking at teacher effectiveness. Now, the measure as they define it is rather wordy, but basically they are seeing how the student performs on the previous year's state exam. Then they say how they performed on this year's exam. They find a difference between those two scores and average that difference for the entire class to create, each class would have one value added score. The teacher would have one value added score per class. Teachers with high value added would have more students performing better on the current year's exam as compared to last year's exam. It's basically handicapping the state test scores. One drawback of this measure is that the handicap is based on the effectiveness of the teacher in the previous year. So if you're following a teacher who wasn't very effective, you're going to have a very high handicap, and it's going to be easier for you to get a high value added score. Where if you're following a very effective teacher, they may have really gotten the most out of these students, and then it's going to be harder for you to outperform them, and thus you may have a lower value added score. So if you have two effective teachers going back to back, students are performing at their highest ability, that second teacher is going to have a very small value added score, even though they may be a very effective teacher. So that's just one drawback that I saw of this measure. So now we're getting into the data here. So first thing we're going to look at is, are the factors reliable between sections? So on the questionnaire, they ask these questions. Are students who have this teacher for one section saying the same thing as students who have that teacher for another section? Are these factors reliable? The figure shows the correlation on all factors examined in this paper between different sections. To the left, we can see the value added on the standardized tests. Did they correlate with each other between sections? And on the right, we can see the factors from the student evaluation. The value added of all four exams has a moderate to low correlation, with performance on the state English exams between sections having the weakest relationship, with the value added on the state math exam had the strongest relationship between value added and value added in one section to value added in another section. This suggests that value added is a better measure of teacher effectiveness in math than ELA. Or that effective teachers in math may be more important than ELA. To the right, we see factors examined by the survey. In the first row is the summative of scores of all the factors. So I took all the factors together. They produce one score from that. Does that correlate with the factors from another section? The second is just the two factors, control and challenge, which turn out to be very strong predictive values, the strongest predictive values. The third row is the other 5 factors together, and then under that we have each individual factor. All factors show a high correlation, showing that student perception of teachers across sections, at least in that year, is very reliable. Now let's get into the meat of the paper. Here we are looking at just the math classes. This figure is examining the correlation between the measures of teacher effectiveness, or the value added, with all factors of the student evaluation. We can see on the left that we have a list of all the factors. The first row, after the naming row, is looking at the relationships between value added and the factor within each section. Or in other words, are the factors on the student surveys predictors of value added on state standard tests? All the correlations are moderate to low, with the best predicting power coming from the combination of factors, control and challenge. The next column, labeled different sections, examines correlations between value added in one section with student evaluation factors of another section. The correlations are persistent, suggesting that the predictive ability of the factors is quite reliable. The 5th and 6th columns show correlations between the value added on the BAM and factors of the evaluation. And the BAM is the higher order math test. Major thing of note here is that the correlations are much weaker. The BAM is supposed to be a test of higher order thinking, and since researchers saw a correlation with the value added on the state test and the BAM, they concluded that the higher quality teachers, or teachers scoring higher on this value added, are not just teaching the test, but are also teaching higher level thinking. I see the fact that there are low correlations between the student evaluation factors and the performance on the BAM is a little troubling. This might suggest that factors of student evaluation may be skewed to evaluate student performances on test scores and not higher order thinking. Next, we can see the correlations between the evaluation factors and value added on ELA. The figures are exactly the same from the previous figure, so I'm going to save some time here by not going in detail and describing it, but just really pointing out the major findings here. The major finding is that there was a relationship, but it was much, much weaker in ELA than we saw in math. So that those correlations are much smaller, not as pronounced. This data strongly suggests that student evaluations may not be a great measure of teacher effectiveness for ELA. So in conclusion, the major findings of this paper looking at student evaluations and are they good measures of teacher effectiveness. The first one really is that student evaluations are reliable across sections. So students in one section are persistent in evaluating the teacher as students in another section. Another finding was the factors of control and challenge have the strongest predictor of academic success. Now this was a little strange because some other papers that I read were really pointing out that evaluations and teacher evaluations were really effective only in instances where teachers were able to focus on increasing their teaching methods and weren't so focused on classroom behavior. So that's a little bit strange. Another one is student evaluations show small correlations with value added, so there is a correlation there. It's much better in math than English, And we still need to have these administrators and other teachers doing in-class observations. That's my presentation. Thank you very much, and have a happy holiday.